Welcome to Historical Crime Chronicles, where we uncover the most captivating, forgotten tales of mystery, scandal, and deception from history's annals. Today, we delve into a story that gripped the Victorian public. A tale of hidden lineage, a fortune left unclaimed, and an investigation that would unravel a journalistic hoax. This is the story of the Missing Heiress. It was 1857. A prominent baronet from the Midlands in England lived a life of prestige and wealth. His eldest son, however, was less concerned with societal expectations. He had secretly fallen in love with the family's cook. In November 1859, the couple secretly married, an act considered scandalous in their circles. A few months later, in January 1860, they welcomed a daughter. But instead of rejoicing, the couple made a fateful decision. With heavy hearts, or perhaps cold calculation, the mother left her infant daughter on the doorstep of a house in Kingstown in Ireland. The baby was left wrapped in 2 sets of clothing, a purse of 50 sovereigns hidden among them, and a small Protestant Testament tied around her neck. The mother rang the bell and then fled into the darkness, watching from a distance as the child was taken in. She and her husband returned to England, leaving no trace of their actions. For the next several years, the child lived in obscurity. Initially taken in by the family she was left with, she was later placed in a workhouse, spending her formative years as a domestic servant, unaware of her lineage or the fortune that could have been hers. That fortune, however, would soon become the subject of one of the most sensational stories of the time. In 1877, the baronet passed away, leaving behind an estate worth £14,000 a year. The title and wealth passed to his eldest son, the father of the abandoned girl. But as fate would have it, the couple died suddenly in Rome, leaving no known heir. The baronet's younger brother, a colonel in a cavalry regiment, was informed of the possibility that his brother had left behind a daughter. Determined to find the missing heiress, the colonel launched an investigation, setting in motion a chain of events that would captivate the nation. Months later, the colonel discovered a crucial piece of evidence, his sister-in-law's diary. Inside, she had recorded the birth of her daughter and the details of the night she abandoned the child. The colonel hired detectives to track her down, following every lead they could find. As news of the missing heiress spread, the fascination didn't stop at the headlines. Numerous women from all walks of life began to come forward, each believing or perhaps hoping that they were the long-lost heiress to the baronet's fortune. By January 1883, newspapers across Britain were reporting about the missing heiress. And then in the March of the same year, they reported that the heiress had been found. A servant girl working in the outskirts of Dublin. The romantic nature of the story gripped the public, with tales of lost fortunes and noble bloodlines captivating readers. According to these reports, the colonel had found his niece and she was set to inherit the estate. As a gesture of gratitude, the newspapers stated that she offered him half of her fortune, though he nobly refused. The Victorian public was enchanted by this story, likening it to something from a Jane Austen novel. But all was not as it seemed. Just days after the story broke regarding finding the missing heiress, doubts began to surface. The details were suspiciously vague. No names of the baronet, his wife, or the colonel were given. And no explanation was provided for the sudden deaths of the heiress's parents. Even an Irish clergyman felt compelled to contribute, writing to a newspaper with a startling revelation that added to the growing mystery. In his letter, the clergyman recounted an experience from years earlier that seemed to echo the narrative of the lost heiress. The clergyman's letter described a young girl he had once known, a child who had been taken from a workhouse by a lady in Kingstown. According to his account, this benefactor treated the girl as her own, raising her in every way as a daughter. It seemed almost too coincidental. The clergyman's story, while plausible, was never fully verified, leaving readers to wonder whether the girl he spoke of was the true inspiration for the tale, or just another coincidence in a sea of abandoned children and fractured families? Investigative journalists, most notably from the Aberdeen Evening Express, began digging into the story. What they found would change everything. A private investigator, Mr. Knowles, who had been hired by the true mother of the child, uncovered the real story. The mother had been a servant in Kingstown, and the father was not a wealthy baronet's son but a gardener in the same household. Once their employer found out that the lady was having a baby, she was dismissed from her job and the gardener refused to support her. She felt like she had no choice. She found the best area in Kingstown, and the baby was indeed abandoned on a doorstep. However, a few years after, the mother sought to find out what had happened to her daughter, but she discovered that the family had moved and the trail went cold. Forward a few more years, and she had saved enough money to enlist the help of a private investigator called Mr. Knowles, but there was no fortune and no grand inheritance. Mr. Knowles started his investigation, but when he hit a dead end, the mother wrote to another investigator called Mr. Atwood, who lived in London, and she again explained the situation. Instead of properly conducting an investigation, however, Mr. Atwood concocted the entire sensational narrative, feeding the press a mix of half-truths and elaborate fiction. It was a story designed to capture the imaginations of the Victorian public and sell papers, but in reality, it was a journalistic hoax. Soon after Mr. Knowles saw the extraordinary accounts in the newspaper, he wrote to the real mother to see where the rumours had come from. The mother replied stating that she had employed Mr. Atwood, but was not sure how such reports had been printed in the newspaper and that there was no truth in them. After more reports emerged about the heiress and her fortune, Mr. Atwood's name was printed as having discovered the missing heiress. Mr. Knowles again contacted his client, the mother, who replied that there was no truth in the details of the accounts. She then visited Mr. Knowles personally and explained that Mr. Atwood had wired her from Dublin. He had sent her a note promising her a detailed report in due course, but she had seen or heard nothing of her daughter, whose alleged discovery was notified in the paper. The revelation of the hoax was just as dramatic as the original story. The public was left to grapple with the fact that they had been deceived. Yet, this tale of the missing heiress remains one of the most captivating examples of how a few strokes of a journalist's pen could turn an ordinary life into a legend, if only for a little while. Who was to blame? As we reach the end of this fascinating yet perplexing tale, the question lingers. Who was truly to blame for the deception that gripped the Victorian public? Was it Mr. Atwood, the investigator who spun a sensational story from the flimsiest of facts? Or was it the journalist, hungry for a headline, willing to embellish a narrative for fame and career advancement? Mr. Atwood, the private investigator, certainly played a central role. It was he who fed the newspapers a tale so dramatic it felt more like a work of fiction than reality. Atwood may have been motivated by money or the thrill of creating a story that would capture public imagination. But was he the true villain, or simply an opportunist who knew how to manipulate a sensationalist press? On the other hand, we have the journalist, the entrepreneur who eagerly ran with the story, possibly knowing full well it was riddled with inconsistencies. Victorian-era newspapers were locked in fierce competition, and a story as juicy as a missing heiress would have sold thousands of copies. Did ambition cloud the journalist's judgment? Was he too eager to deliver a headline at the expense of the truth? There's a third consideration: society itself. In the 19th century, stories of abandoned children were tragically common. Many Victorians lived in a world where fortunes could change overnight, and children, often left on doorsteps or in workhouses, represented hope for a better life. For a brief moment, perhaps this story gave the public a sense of optimism, a belief that even the most forgotten child could rise to wealth and status. We may never know if the woman from Kingstown ever found her daughter, but what we do know is that this tale was more than just a hoax. It was a reflection of a society yearning for happy endings in a time where they were few and far between. In the end, this tale reminds us that even in a time of deceit, the human desire for hope, however fleeting, can drive both the creation and consumption of such stories. Whether for fame, fortune, or just a moment of comfort, we all play our part. Thank you for joining us on Historical Crime Chronicles. Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification button to keep up to date with more episodes. See you next time.